9 little letters. And maybe the most expensive 9 letters in the Rolex world.
Definitely.
Let's do it. What is up, Watch fam? Welcome to Rant T&H. I am Anna from Theo and Harris, and I'm joined here by my friend
Christian. You're the boss
Theo and
now.
Harris. I'm the boss of Rant T&H. Before we get into today's topic, which is Tiffany stamped Rolex dials, let's do a quick wristwatch check. What are you wearing?
Well, very appropriately, I am wearing a Rolex GMT Master
Very
Pepsi,
nice.
which is probably
A favorite?
it's one of the world favorites right now, one of the most collectible and talked about watches in the Rolex world. Or really, period, in watches, with a Tiffany and Company stamp. And
cool.
in a little while, we're going to get into what the hell that means and why you really need to care. What are you wearing, Anna?
First, what am I wearing? I am wearing a Tudor Date Day with a gorgeous blue dial.
Yeah.
You talked about this in last Wednesday's video. Last Wednesday's In the Middle Value Vintage Watches No Name series.
The condition is really the biggest thing here. The watch itself is beautiful, and it would be beautiful if it was, if it was in normal condition. It happens to be in remarkable condition.
It's sharp.
It's razor sharp.
Yeah.
You gotta watch yourself.
So first, let's just address what is a Tiffany stamped Rolex dial.
Yes.
So this has to do with the idea of co-branding, where Rolex, or really any brand, has obviously their stamp on the dial, but there's also another brand's stamp on the dial. Rolex's history of this has been slightly limited, but brands like Patek Philippe have had a partnership with Tiffany for, since the 1840s.
Okay.
So that actually is one it's much more common to Patek and Tiffany.
Patek has done Tiffany, they've done Bayer, they've done Gobi Milano, which is an Italian jeweler. Rolex has done Serpico e Lino. Rolex has done co-branding with Domino's. They've done co-branding with Coca-Cola. They've done co-branding with Pool Interdrill. They've done co-branding with so many companies. There are very famous vintage Hoyers that aren't even stamped Hoyer, but rather just Volvo. Very collectible watches. Cool. But you're right. There's a long history of Rolex co-branding watches.
Well, not that long comparatively.
Right. Yes, you're correct. But still a history, right? That we have much to talk about. And it goes 2 routes, right? One, it was for a retailer. It's a retailer signature and co-branding, which again, Tiffany, Serpico e Lino, so many others. Gobi. Then you have the other direction, which is for a company, like we said before.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's more like special order. Like, I think that's probably more limited.
Yeah, those are for a lot of employees and things like that. Like
and that's like the company themselves would gift them to people, not necessarily like you couldn't buy a Domino's Rolex at like a retail store of any kind.
No. So now the question is, Domino's requested Rolex to make watches, but how did retailer stamped watches come about, specifically Tiffany?
So this Tiffany Rolex relationship started in like the early mid 1950s.
Okay.
So Tiffany was like, hey, this is all casual language. This is not verbatim.
Yeah.
Hey, what up? Like, we want to sell your watches. And Rolex was like, cool, sell them in your retail stores. You can put your name on them. That's basically what happened. Then Rolexes are being sold out of Tiffany locations, and Tiffany, as part of the deal, says, okay, we're going to sell them, but we're going to put our name on these dials as well. So
something you mentioned before is really interesting. The way that Tiffany was doing it in the beginning is different than how it progressed, right?
Yes, definitely. So in the beginning of this relationship, Rolex watches were sent to Tiffany locations, and they were signed by Tiffany there.
Okay.
So Rolex had no part of that.
Okay.
And then later on, I don't know exactly when, but eventually Rolex was like, you know what, we're just going to print them for you.
Gotcha.
So that they're shipped with the Tiffany stamp already on them. And then Tiffany started servicing watches and servicing Rolexes. So the Tiffany service centers, the retail locations, and Rolex themselves were all stamping Rolex and Tiffany.
Wow.
And that's where you have a lot of the discrepancies between the different stamps.
And what's kind of funny is, at least to my understanding, when this relationship did exist, like you said, from the 1950s until when?
The 90s.
So from the 50s until the 90s, many people that I've run into, I was not born then, but that did buy, happened to buy Tiffany Rolexes, it really wasn't because it was a valuable thing. The retail prices were the same. There was no premium added.
They were just selling Rolexes.
It wasn't particularly special, the dial at Tiffany. I have 2 cousins. One of my cousins' wives worked at Tiffany for many years, and she bought her husband a Rolex Submariner with the Tiffany dial, and the brother-in-law a Datejust with a Tiffany dial.
Wow.
So at the time, again, it wasn't a big deal. It was, hey, that's where I got my discount, my corporate discount. It wasn't, it wasn't about anything more than that. But fast forward years later, this is not, one, it's done, it's no longer, and two, it's become a peak of interest, right? It's become kind of a whole sub-world in vintage watches of collectability, and that's an understatement. It's of extreme collectability.
Right.
Tiffany Rolexes, like Tiffany Patek Philippe, but Tiffany Rolexes are some of the most coveted vintage Rolexes out there. And as such, as you would imagine, fraud has followed.
Yeah, right? There's a huge counterfeit population of Tiffany Rolexes.
But now the question becomes, why is it worth it to make a fake Tiffany stamp? It comes down to the numbers. What kind of premiums are we talking about here, Anna? What does a Tiffany stamp add to a Rolex watch?
I mean, it's case by case, right? The Datejust, for example, which was just listed on Theo & Harris and just sold from Theo & Harris, had a Tiffany stamp and was about double the price. It was like a $3,000 premium because of the Tiffany stamp.
The watch maybe was a $4,000 watch. I think it sold for $7,000. And frankly, that was, it sounds crazy, but that was a pretty conservative price for retail. I've seen Tiffany Datejust quick-set sell for $10,000, a little bit more.
Is that another, is that auction? Is it just normal
no,
from
just
any
kind
normal
of
retailer?
Normal retail. It's just a matter of, how quickly do you want to find it a new home? Do you really want to, sit on a watch for a year? No, we wanted to list the watch at the right price and just sell it, right? Now for us, because we aren't working with millions of dollars in capital, it is very rare that we are able to find ourselves or afford a Tiffany Rolex. They're very, very expensive. This GMT, for example, carries $20,000 premium because of the Tiffany stamp. But is it unjustified? I don't know. Are those 9 letters worth $20,000 in this instance?
Well, there's a lot to be said for what makes watches expensive, and obviously we've tried to answer this, and and many people have tried to answer this, and there are a million different answers. But something that I think is really interesting is that not only did Rolex's partnership with Tiffany end in the 90s when they basically said, we're not going to put your name on it anymore, and Tiffany was like, bye, Right. That's when Rolex stopped co-branding at all. I believe there are no more co-branding really kind of after Tiffany, because that was such a big relationship. And at that point, that's it, it's over. And then it's like, okay, wow, Rolex was really into something, and I think they did it, pretty heavily with Tiffany compared to other little stints with other companies. But when something like that ends, this sort of era of co-branding, and it ends for such a big company, the relics that are left from that time period are going to be worth more, just because they are, a totally different time, a different way that the brand itself was functioning, and there are limited numbers, right? So
you're right.
It plays into Rarity.
Not only are there limited numbers, but the examples can't get better in condition. They can only get worse. Watches don't get better; they get worse, right? That's how it is. So when you polish a watch, it becomes the case has less integrity, there's less steel, right? So every year, every day, right, the number of quality examples out there, it goes down because there are people out there that own them that don't treat them properly, right? So really, the ones that exist are the only ones that will ever exist, and there will only be fewer every year. So yes, from a rarity standpoint, that's very important. But I think that there are 2 other points here that are very important to mention. And first is this: are 9 letters worth $20,000? Probably not. I think that's probably pretty crazy to say so. But from an objective kind of, just look at the dollars and cents of the entire situation. Tiffany Rolexes are some of the, again, most collectible, most sought after and desirable pieces. So if you're someone that really wants to look at or justify watches from an investment point of view, it's hard to argue with the Tiffany stamp. It really is. Now, why are Tiffany stamp Rolexes so desirable? Yes, of course, rarity is extremely important, but I think the other big thing here, the big variable which forks into 2, is this. It's unmistakable. Right? Not everyone knows what gilt is. Not everyone knows what a Bart Simpson crown is. Not everyone knows what a pointed crown guard is. These are nuances in Rolexes. These are things that not everyone can see. Everyone can read Tiffany Co. That is a detail that is undeniable. That will never go unappreciated, number 1. Right. Number 2, because it is Tiffany Co., one of the most prestigious retailers in the world of jewelry, maybe top 5 retailers in the world, there is an inherent market, even separate from Rolex. They bring their own tremendous brand. I don't think that Gobi Milano is a big, big collectors, collectors in watches maybe, but Gobi in and of itself, I don't think carries the cachet that Tiffany & Co. does.
But maybe it's even more wide-ranging,
Absolutely.
It's a bigger net. You're casting a wider net.
To me, Tiffany stamp Rolexes are interesting. Yes, are they really expensive? Yeah, and really $30,000 is nothing. The Tiffany Rolexes go in the hundreds of thousands, millions if they're on the right watch, which comes down to detail. But, and I know it sounds crazy, I think they're worth it. I really do.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I know. I can't say with certainty that I'll ever be able to afford one, but just knowing watches, knowing the watch market, it's a perfect storm, really.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thanks for letting us take over your lunch break or your commute or your before bed or your morning routine, whatever it is. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, and like this video and comment below if you have a topic suggestion.
How many things are you going to tell these people to do?
Just get engaged. We want to hear from you, so let us know.
Head on over to the watch shop at theoandharris.com, guys. So that's it. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you all soon.